This week, two controversial attempts by the Trump administration to fire top federal officials with Atlanta ties and national implications.
All right, breaking overnight, in an unprecedented move, President Trump announced he is firing Fed Governor Lisa Cook over allegations of mortgage fraud. This is the first time a president has fired a Fed governor in the central bank's 111-year history.
And at the center of the unprecedented move, a condo in Midtown Atlanta.
And then another termination.
Tonight, we're following breaking news out of the CDC where top officials are resigning en masse after sudden changes to COVID vaccine policies were announced earlier today. Hours after that decision was announced, the Washington Post reported that Susan Menarez, the director of the Centers for Disease Control, was ousted after just weeks on the job.
This followed weeks of tumult at the Atlanta-based CDC.
On today's show, what comes next after the moves to fire a Fed governor and the director of the CDC, and what the firings mean for Georgia.
Plus, Governor Brian Kemp dispatches the National Guard to help with immigration enforcement as Trump deploys guardsmen on the streets of Washington, D.C.
It's unconstitutional to use military men and women in this manner. When you start to see this in our cities, they're setting up for the use of martial law.
And why a judge is holding the Fulton County Commission in contempt of court. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In from WABE.
Okay, Sam, so why is a Midtown condo at the center of President Donald Trump's unprecedented attempt to fire a Georgia-born governor of the Federal Reserve?
Trump has criticized the independent Federal Reserve for months for declining to slash interest rates, something the Fed's governors helped decide. Now he's moved to fire one of them. Lisa Cook, a former Michigan State University professor appointed by President Joe Biden. Now, Trump cited a criminal referral made by his director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, accusing Cook of mortgage fraud for claiming both an Ann Arbor, Michigan house and a luxury high-rise condo in Midtown Atlanta as her primary residence. Now, the mortgage applications have not been made public, and Cook has not been charged with any crime. But to find out more about mortgage fraud, Rahul, I called up Georgia State University law professor Sam Donaldson, and he told me that lenders often provide lower rates on a primary residence than, say, a vacation home or an investment property.
A bank wants to know that you're going to be living there, so you have an even higher incentive to make timely payments.
But Donaldson says claiming two primary residences, it doesn't necessarily mean fraud.
You can't tell just because an inaccurate statement was made on a mortgage application that it was done with an intent to deceive. And that's the key for fraud.
And Rahul, I learned that Cook is actually a Georgia native, and she earned her undergraduate degree from the historically black Spelman College here in Atlanta, and grew up about 100 miles away in Milledgeville, where her mother was the first black tenured faculty member at a college there. Cook gave that school's 2024 commencement address. Take a listen.
My family lived through the events that brought Milledgeville out of a deeply segregated South and made Georgia College and State University into the university it is today.
And she described integrating her elementary school in Milledgeville.
Some of the students did not welcome us, but the school did.
Now, a president can only fire a Fed governor with cause, which typically means gross negligence or malfeasance. So on Thursday, Cook filed a lawsuit challenging Trump's authority to fire her. This is a test, Rahul, of executive power that could end up at the U.S. Supreme Court.
And then this week, there was another high-profile Trump administration firing. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy moved to oust Susan Menarez, the director of the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
And Rahul, Manaras had only just been confirmed by the Senate less than a month ago. The White House said she was terminated because she wasn't aligned with Trump's agenda and refused to resign. But lawyers for Manaras says she serves at the pleasure of the president, and only Trump can personally fire her. Manaras, an infectious disease researcher who served under several presidents, reportedly clashed with HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy about vaccine policy. Here's Manaras at her Senate confirmation hearing this summer.
Vaccines absolutely save lives. And if I'm confirmed as a CDC director, I commit to making sure that we continue to prioritize vaccine availability.
Manaras' lawyers say she was targeted for standing up for science, writing in a statement that when she, quote, refused to rubber stamp unscientific, reckless directives and fire dedicated health experts, she chose protecting the public over serving a political agenda, unquote. Now, at least 4 top CDC officials resigned this week, and this comes just weeks after a gunman fired at CDC buildings in Atlanta, killing a DeKalb County police officer. Authorities say the gunman baselessly blamed the COVID vaccine for his mental health issues.
Sam, I want to stay on another effort by President Trump and Republicans that is raising eyebrows.
Yeah, President Trump has deployed the National Guard in D.C. for what he says is an effort to fight crime and illegal immigration. Now, here in Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp has said he will deploy Georgia guardsmen to assist with immigration enforcement. And some are wondering if Trump may try to deploy troops in Atlanta, as he's done in the nation's capital.
So the Georgia National Guard is finalizing plans to mobilize about 75 Guard members to work at ICE facilities in Georgia. It follows a request made by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In a statement, Governor Brian Kemp says Guard members will provide administrative and logistical support, but not conduct law enforcement functions like making arrests. Some of the examples that were given: appointment scheduling, data entry, and vehicle maintenance. For now, Guard members are scheduled to begin training in mid-September and begin their duties shortly after. They will report to ICE leadership, but remain under control of the governor and Guard leadership. Kemp notes that this is different from what's happening in Washington, D.C., where Guard members have had a presence on the streets. In its own statement, the Georgia Guard says it has no units involved in that mission in Washington, D.C. On social media, Kemp says he is, quote, proud to stand with the White House in its ongoing effort to crack down on illegal immigration and keep America safe, unquote.
So, Rahul, what's the reaction been here in Georgia? And I wonder if you've heard any concerns about the immigration-focused mission maybe escalating further.
So I brought in a couple of lawmakers, State Representatives David Clark and Derek Jackson. They're both military veterans, and they both sit on the State House Defense and Veteran Affairs Committee. Jackson, a Democrat running for governor, calls Kemp's decision a misuse of the National Guard.
There's a reason why the military and the police, the local law enforcement, are different. We're trained differently, right? Local police officers, for example, they're trained how to exercise the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. Military men and women are not trained in that manner.
Jackson, who's a Navy veteran, added this.
It's unconstitutional to use military men and women in this manner. This is making the citizens very nervous when they see military men and women in uniform.
And as you heard in the show open, Jackson believes that this is all setting up for the use of martial law. So Representative David Clark is a Republican running for lieutenant governor. He's an Army veteran. Clark says he fully supports the decision of Governor Kemp.
I trust Governor Kemp and President Trump and handling using the National Guard in the right way. I'll just say, by handling critical support and administrative tasks, the Guard could free up ICE agents to focus on what matters most, and that's arresting violent criminal illegals and keeping our community safe. And that is something I know the voters want.
Sam, I followed up with Clark about Guard members supporting local law enforcement or being on the streets.
I support whatever Governor Kemp wants to do, and I know also he's making sure that he'll be using the National Guard properly and in accordance with the law.
So very much what you're hearing, at least with the governor and Representative Clark, is connecting the use of the Guard to immigration enforcement.
So that's the reaction from lawmakers, but WABE's Julian Virgin also went out to talk to Metro Atlanta residents about the possibility of deploying the Guard in Atlanta, and here is what he heard.
If you're following what's going on in the Washington, D.C. area, I feel like that's a pilot program launch that they're trying to do, particularly for cities with black mayors. This is something that all the citizens should be thinking about. Do we want to live in an occupied state?
I think it's ridiculous. It's obviously just a show of force. Just another example of authoritarian creep.
I'm indifferent on it right now. Right now, I'm indifferent. Probably a little 2-week trial, week trial. We come down here, see what work they putting in, and then we make a decision.
The voices you heard in order were Atlanta residents Colette Knight and John Kopanex and Marietta resident Joshua Myers.
So let's take a break. This is Plugged In from WABE. Welcome back to Plugged In from WABE.
A judge is holding the Fulton County Commission in civil contempt of court for refusing to comply with an order to appoint the local Republican Party's 2 nominees for the Fulton County Election Board. The judge has ordered the commission pay a $10,000 fine beginning Friday at noon for every day that the body does not comply with the order.
Sam, let's back up and recount how we got here in the first place.
Well, the Fulton County Election Board is made up of 2 members nominated by the Fulton County Republican Party and 2 nominated by the Democratic Party, and also a nonpartisan chair. Now, the Fulton County Commission's Democratic majority has refused to approve the Fulton County GOP's 2 election board nominees, Jason Frazier and Julie Adams. Both have embraced baseless election fraud claims. Adams is a current member who sued her own board for the right to vote against certifying election results, sparking a showdown you might remember in court ahead of the 2024 election. Frazier has helped lead the effort to challenge the eligibility of thousands of voters. Earlier this month, Superior Court Judge David Emerson ordered the 2 Republicans seated, ruling that when the law says the commission shall appoint the nominees, that means they have to. The Fulton GOP asked the court to hold the commissioners in contempt when they continued to refuse to obey.
Okay, so there was this emergency hearing on that motion this week. Sam, you were inside the courtroom. What did you hear?
Let's start with the case that was made by the Fulton GOP, represented by attorney Trey Oliver III.
Democracy is dependent upon public officials following the law. That applies to all persons, no matter one's title, no matter one's party.
Now, the Democratic commissioners argue that approving the GOP nominees would undercut their ability to keep appealing the decision. This is Don Samuel, an attorney representing the county commission.
We can't help reading in the paper these days the defiance of the judiciary. We are all concerned about the respect for the judiciary. We are not in defiance of your order. We are trying to protect our right to judicial review.
So what he's kind of saying here is that even if the commission went ahead and appointed these 2 nominees, there would really be no way to remove them until their terms are up, even if the appeal eventually overturns the lower court decision requiring that they be put on the election board. But Judge Emerson ultimately did not find that argument convincing and wrote in his order, quote, "The court finds beyond a reasonable doubt that the Board of Commissioners has failed to comply with this court's order."
So you've been talking here about this extraordinary motion to hold the commissioners in civil contempt, but I know you've wanted to talk a little bit more about the merits of the case itself.
Right. So at the crux of this case is what it means when the law says the commission shall appoint 2 nominees from the local Republican Party and 2 nominees from the local Democratic Party. These Democratic Fulton commissioners say, hey, the court can't force elected legislators to vote a certain way. Otherwise, they're just a rubber stamp. The commission has to sign off on 2 Republican nominees, but that doesn't mean that individual members have to vote to okay these specific 2.
Everybody agrees the word shall often means must. I recognize that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's a malleable word.
Now, the Fulton GOP says, wait a minute, the commissioners do have discretion, but it's pretty narrow.
Their discretion is to ensure that the candidates nominated by the parties are in line with the criteria laid out by the General Assembly.
And Rahul, all of this discussion made me think of another debate and legal battle last year over whether local election board members could decline to vote to certify election results. You may remember that Julie Adams, the same Julie Adams who the Fulton GOP wants to nominate to continue serving on the local election board, she sued the board last year to affirm her right to vote against certifying an election. But the courts ultimately said members shall certify, and that means they have to. Here's Oliver again.
One of their chief complaints about one of the nominees, Ms. Julie Adams, was that she filed a case as to whether or not she had to, as a duty, as a member of the Board of Elections, to certify the election. And when the court said that she did, she ultimately complied with that. And now they're challenging an order of the court, and they're saying that they don't have to comply. It's pretty rich.
Judge Emerson said, yeah, I've been thinking about that too.
That's one of the cases that I looked at in making my decision, which that was the position of Fulton County in that case, which just came down in July, which it makes this case all that much more interesting.
Now, Don Samuel, the attorney for the Fulton commissioners, said, wait, this situation is different. If the appeals court ultimately gives the final word upholding the lower court decision, then fine, they'll put these guys on the local election board. But until then...
Nobody said, and if you don't do what Judge McBurney says, you're going to be held in contempt. She appealed. That's what we're asking for, is to have the same right that Ms. Adams had.
Emerson is holding the commission in civil contempt, not criminal, and also ordered the defendants to pay the plaintiff's attorney's fees. He also wrote that the fine will be paid to the clerk of the Superior Court and then be transferred to the state of Georgia. I got word, Rahul, that the commission plans to appeal the contempt order, so the drama will continue.
Now, I want to turn from the local Republican Party to the national one.
Yeah, the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee have been having summer meetings. And Rahul, you reported last week from the RNC meeting held here in Atlanta.
All right, if we have everybody go ahead and take their seats and ready to get this rolling.
So the Republican National Committee brought their summer meeting to downtown Atlanta at the Westin Peachtree Plaza. The only day that was open to the media was Friday.
Hey, everybody, please take your seats.
There was 168 RNC delegates, 3 members from each state, plus from the 6 territories, including Georgia's 3 members.
Josh McCoon, Jason Thompson, Amy Kramer.
The main event was the election of a new RNC chair as Michael Whatley was stepping down.
With President Trump's complete and total endorsement, I am running to be the next senator from the state of North Carolina.
There was only one candidate nominated to replace Whatley, a candidate with the backing of President Trump, Florida State Senator Joe Gruters, who has also served as Florida Republican Party chair.
The ayes have it, and Joe Gruters is elected as the chairman of the Republican National Committee.
Sam, I wanted to share 2 things that Gruters said while addressing the RNC that I found interesting.
There's so many factions of the Republican Party. I'm sure you've seen online Joe Gruters is not as good of a conservative. We could do better. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, whatever party does a better job of uniting the factions and bringing everybody together, we all win at the end.
And then this is how Gruters ended the RNC summer meeting in Atlanta.
Remember, this is the president's party. We're going to do everything humanly possible to help him advance his agenda and make sure that he's successful.
Sam, this was just a reconfirmation of President Trump's power over the national party structure.
All right, bring the conversation back to what all this means for Georgia politics.
So, Sam, I was sitting in the back of the ballroom, and that's where I caught up with RNC member and Georgia Republican Party Chair Josh McCoon, and I asked him about what Gruters said about uniting party factions.
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us that are in leadership positions to remind our candidates, you need to promote yourself. You need to explain and make the case to Republican primary voters why you are best suited to the job. We do not need to spend limited time and resources fighting with each other, tearing each other down, because particularly in the Senate race, Senator Ossoff is simply out there raising money.
And then this week, the Democratic National Committee held its summer meeting in Minneapolis. And Rahul, you caught up with the Democratic Party of Georgia chair, Charlie Bailey.
Yeah, he just got back from Minnesota when we talked, and I asked him kind of the same question about uniting factions. For example, how Democrats are split on the issue of what's happening in Gaza.
You're going to have disagreements. I mean, you are. It's not, nobody's doing anything, quote unquote, wrong. Like, you're going to have disagreements over, a host of issues. Same as the Republican Party.
Bailey says the Democratic Party has to focus on what unites Democrats and core issues like those important to middle-class voters.
So that they can have that right to health care, that their kids can go to good schools, that they have an equal shot at achieving the American dream. That is every Democrat you talk to going to say that. And the contrast with that and what Republicans do, not what they say.
When it comes to overall messaging, Bailey tells me one of the big things is connecting GOP candidates, federal and state, to the Republican tax and spending bill.
Now, the DNC summer meeting in Minneapolis was cut short after a nearby shooting at a Minneapolis area Catholic school during Mass that left at least 2 children dead. And Rahul, I wondered, did you ask Bailey about that?
I did, and he talked about the moments after it happened, and they started finding out.
Yeah, it started popping up on everybody's phones kind of at the same time. Rahul, we had just, maybe the day before, heard from the state senator, that was, he and his wife that madman, that evil person that killed the House Speaker and her husband and their dog, attempted to kill state senator and his wife, and they survived. And he spoke to us, and it was emotional, man. And it's just unimaginable hard to process, that an evil person would, shoot kids that are praying in church. It's hard to even say the words.
Sam, it's going to be interesting to see the debate around gun safety policy, especially as here in Georgia, we're coming up on the first anniversary of the shootings at Appalachia High School.
Before we go, I want to offer a correction to a recent episode. I accidentally referred to American University professor William Braniff as a professor at Emory University. My apologies for the error.
And that's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. If you listen on demand, head over to the Plugged In feed to subscribe and leave us a rating.
You can also find us on the radio at 90.1 Friday mornings from 9:30 to 10.
And remember, as public media faces an uncertain funding stream, you can support this work with a gift at wabe.org/donate. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas. We'll be back next week.